An armed labor union conflict in Morewood, Pennsylvania, in Westmoreland County in 1891, 9 mine workers were shot and killed by a number of deputies on duty, awaiting under the orders of Deputy McConnell, striking for higher wages and an 8-hour workday. The local mines and coke works were owned by industrialist Henry Clay Frick. Henry Frick was the founder of H.C. Frick and Company Coke Manufacturing. He was also the chairman of Carnegie Steel Company. After his success, he financed the Pennsylvania Railroad and the Reading Company. He was vilified by the public and historians for his lack of moral in business and ruthlessness. Mr. Frick, son of a failed businessman, vowed he would be a millionaire by the age of 30. In 1871, at the young age of 21, Frick joined 2 cousins and a friend in a small partnership using beehive ovens to turn coal into coke, a fuel with few impurities and a high carbon content made from coal, for use in steel manufacturing. This was the Frick Coke Company. By 1880, Frick bought out his partner and changed the company name to H.C. Frick and Company, which employed 1,000 workers and controlled 80% of the coal output in Pennsylvania. Asserting his absolute control over the mines and its coke ovens, Frick purchased the Mammoth Mines property from Colonel Moore on August 29, 1889. Frick soon came into conflict with the Morewood miners and coke workers. In 1891, 16,000 workers walked out for higher wages and safer conditions. On January 27, 1891, there was an explosion of Mammoth Mine No. 1, which killed 109 coal miners from Eastern Europe. Mine safety reforms became a political issue after this event. The United Mine Workers Union was formed only the previous year. Strikers began with a work stoppage on February 2, 1891, with weeks of unrest, evictions of the mining families from company-controlled homes. Tensions started to mount. Late Thursday night, strikers were holding a meeting at the Standard Works. The meeting broke around 2 or 3 a.m. Friday morning, April 3, 1891, when a large crowd of strikers accompanied by a brass marching band began to march down the road toward the Standard Company store. Although this image is from the Latimer Massacre, another famous Pennsylvania strike, it depicts very well how the events unfolded at the Morewood Massacre. When the men reached the company store, where a number of deputies on duty awaited under the order of Deputy McConnell, the men stopped for a moment, then continued to march toward the gates where Captain Lohr and 12 men were stationed. This picture, although not from the Morewood Massacre, is of the Colorado National Guard, who, as well as the deputies, were called to stop strikers. Thus, this depicts very well what that scene might have looked like. They shot 2 rounds into the crowd, killing 6 miners immediately and leaving a number wounded. 3 others died of their wounds shortly after. Most of the dead miners were Hungarian and Polish, who struggled with English and their new environment. This is a picture from another event, the Latimer Massacre, which took place on September 10, 1897, and is in kind to the Morewood Massacre. Here, the strikers marched to Latimer and were stopped by a force led by Sheriff Martin. The unexpected halt led to confusion and jostling, and shots suddenly rang out. 19 of the miners were killed, and perhaps 50 more were wounded, in what became known as the Latimer Massacre. People referred to these foreigners as hunkies, a slur for Eastern Europeans, who were considered dumb and unimportant. These men were welcome to pick up a pick or shovel, but were quickly reminded, if they asked about pay or safety, how easily they could be replaced. Most of the bodies from the mine explosion and the massacre were put in a common trench in St. John's Cemetery in Mount Pleasant. The Pennsylvania Labor History Society believed 79 of the miners and 7 strikers were buried there. The strikers' deaths had far less sympathy than the mine explosion from the public or the press. People felt they put themselves in the path of the company militia by marching. The shooting deaths went largely unquestioned by citizens or the newspaper, whose sympathy was with Mr. Frick. There were several arrests and warrants sworn out against Captain Lohr and 11 of his deputies for felonious shooting. All the deputies but one gave themselves up and furnished the $300 bond. They were again arrested and charged with murder, but were released on $3,000 bond each. Almost 30 strikers were arrested for participating in the march, and 10, including several band members, were convicted. Captain Lohr and his deputies were acquitted, as was most often the case when the coal companies controlled the governor and the courts. The coke workers' strike collapsed about 2 months after the shooting. The stories of the miners in the strike massacre were overlooked for more than a century. The Pennsylvania Historical and Museum Commission has placed markers at the site of the Morewood Massacre and at the mass grave in St. John's the Baptist Cemetery. The state has decided that both events are compelling enough to be noted with historical markers. The picture depicted here is of the gardens of one of the miners' patch houses at Morewood. The Tipple Powerhouse Coke Works and other associated buildings of the Morewood Mine and Coke Works, Morewood, East Huntington Township, Westmoreland County, Pennsylvania, can be seen in the background of this photo. The photo is from an early postcard, and the date is unknown, and is also courtesy of the Mount Pleasant Historical Society archives. Depicted here, the Mount Pleasant Supply Company store at Morewood Mine supplied food, clothing, and furniture for 1,000 people. Most of the needs of the miners and coke workers at the Morewood Mine and Coke Works could be met at the company's store, although sometimes at inflated prices. Several of the mine buildings, Powerhouse, Tipple, Coke Yard, can be seen in the background. Again, this photo is courtesy of the Mount Pleasant Historical Society archives. The superintendent's house, which is depicted here at Morewood Mine and Coke Works, was occupied by Morris Ramsey and his family circa 1891. Again, this photo is courtesy of the Mount Pleasant Historical Society archives.
So, brother, when you're knocking on the man that digs the coal, just stop and think.